Didn't the other kids tell you not to come here? Go back before it's too late!
At the heart of horror, there has always been more than spooks and scares. Sometimes, it's not what you see, but what you hear. Welcome to Sound Scary. Each week, we talk to the artists, the musicians, the fans, the people who haunt the shadowy corners of your mind. Join us as we delve into the deepest, darkest, and most unforgettable earscapes. Welcome to Sound Scary. Welcome to another episode of Sounds a Little Scary, and I'm your co-host, James JimmyO Oster.
And I'm Ryan Cultrera. And, Jimmy, today I am super excited to talk with our guest. He's a director. You know him from Free Fire, from Kill List, High Rise, and his latest film, In the Earth, comes out this Friday, March 16th. We're super excited to welcome filmmaker Ben Wheatley to the show. Thanks for joining us, Ben. So the show that we're having you on is called Sound Scary, and one of the things we focus on is kind of the soundscapes of horror, and your film is built heavily on the use of sound to build this tension. Can you kind of talk about what inspired your soundscape for this film?
I started the whole project wanting to base it around sound and light because that's the building blocks of cinema. I wanted to make sure that they were incorporated into the script so that in a way that music and sound weren't the kind of poor cousins. They were actually a plot device, so you would then be able to have the excuse just to put it front and center rather than use it as an aid to pointing the audience towards emotion. It's actually the sound is the story, so that was the beginning of it. And then once you're there, it allows you to be much more wild with the frequencies that you're using and with the style of the music and also with the sound design.
One of the things I loved about this film is that it brought about this kind of 70s horror tone, which you don't see as much in film these days. Like, I felt kind of notes of Ken Russell in there. Can you kind of talk about what genre films and filmmakers inspired your style and tone of this film?
I mean, I think I'm a big mix of everything I've ever seen. I don't think I try not. It's difficult. There is a contradiction in this. Is that when asked what my references are, I always go, "Oh no, I don't have any." But obviously there are tons. So it's difficult. But I'm not like a kind of filmmaker who kind of writes down a list of things I want to be like and then structures it around that. It's more that it comes out. That it's in there. And I definitely found with this movie, like some of the things I thought I was referencing was in there, but then other things I didn't even think about as I was filming it. Going, Christ, this is really like XYZ. I'm like, oh, I didn't realize this was happening, but I'm going to go with it, kind of thing. So and sometimes you don't even know what it is until you watch the film back and you go, oh right, that's what's influenced it. But you never even knew. But I think for me, across this movie, it kind of feels like it's a kind of potted history of my interest in horror. So you've got like, initially it's more like kind of Brothers Grimm, Hansel and Gretel, and then it becomes like a Maniac in the Woods type film, which is like a Texas Chainsaw Massacre type thing. Then there's body horror, and then it starts to move into a kind of midnight movie style kind of phase 5, and then it goes out into British science fiction, so it's like Quatermass or like Doctor Who, 70s Doctor Who and stuff like that. And then there's so it's tricky. It moves around basically.
I mean, that's, definitely something I picked up on, and it really shines, honestly. The kind of the flipping of the genres throughout the course of this. And, one of the other things about your film is there's definitely a lot of duality at work here, folklore versus science, man versus nature. But I guess one of the things that struck me the most was expectation versus reality. You kind of set up this scripted, this folklore, and then you flip it on its head throughout the course. Was that used to kind of put the audience in the mindset of these characters, kind of flipping our expectations along the way?
Yeah, but also it's like it's also thinking about what folklore is in itself, and that I found, having made films which have kind of folk elements in them, that sometimes when you think that the stuff you're dealing with is ancient, it's not that old. Sometimes it's Victorian, sometimes it's 70s, and then the other side of it is that you kind of know in your heart that there is something there that's old, but it's maybe not the stuff that you think it is, and I like that. I wanted to explore that, where you make assumptions as a person in history, but also as within genre, that things are a certain way and they're not always that way, so the Parnag Fegness of it is just made up, there was going to be, we're going to make it even more like it was connected back to like a 70s TV show or something like that, that it really is fake, but there's a seed of reality to it. It's like what the standing stone is real, what the history is connected to that standing stone. We don't really know why it was there, how it got there, but there is something strange in the forest but it's organic, and it's very, very weird, and it's not necessarily, it's weirder than the world of humans and their stories,
And this wasn't necessarily a pandemic movie, but I read that you began this in the first few weeks of COVID lockdown. What kind of inspired you to weave, contextualizing it in the time of the pandemic into the film?
Because I generally make films about that are contemporary. And so I wasn't about to make a film that wasn't contemporary. You know what I mean? It's like, it's an interesting thing that's happened, that there's a lot of talk about like the pandemic films or whatever, but 6 months or like 12 months ago, they were just films. They were just like in the moment, but the moment has become larger than the movies in a way, I suppose. But I think that everything, that this moment that we've gone through, it's changed all of us. And there's no going back to what it was like before. It's not going to happen, and I think that it's slightly disingenuous not to make things about the moment that you're in. And that's kind of that is a responsibility of horror as much as anything. Is like the best horror, I think, is it reflects the time period, certainly. I mean, for me, it's from stuff like the Dawn of the Dead and the Romero cycle of zombie films are very, very pointedly about that period, and they're all the better for it,
And, it also works in the sense of, during this pandemic, so many of us turned to going out to nature as a safe space, and you kind of turned that on your head a little bit.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think for me, it was about, dealing with realities, and like there's so many different realities flying around all the time and being redefined and spun upside down, and and certainly in the UK there was a lot of kind of strange kind of thinking in terms of, certainly we have all this 5G stuff and conspiracy stuff, and like in it seemed to be really, the fabric of reality itself seemed to be being torn up.
We are in a time of the pandemic, and you're making a film that has reference to that. But do you think it was a difficult balance to not be too on the nose about what we're going through and still tell a story that kind of encapsulates it?
I think that's the job of genre in general, isn't it? From whenever you make a movie, it's like, why do you make a genre film and not a heartfelt tone poem about your feelings, which is one way to go, but then you don't have an audience that will necessarily watch it. I mean, a lot of that stuff, I think genre and science fiction and historical as well, are about kind of sugarcoating a pill of that you want to talk about the society at large, but you don't want to turn people off by them feel like they're being lectured. you know, there's certain bits of horror which I think were where you wouldn't go during the pandemic, you know, like something like The Crazies or something like or zombie films in general are slightly screwed by the pandemic, because it is the pandemic brings to the surface all those fears but for real, you know, and there's no point making drama about that, because we know what it is. It's an actual thing. And I thought it's quite interesting. And I also thought that, you know, like a lot of the questions of the zombie film were answered for us. What would we do? Well, nothing.
Basically,
yeah, seriously.
Well, I gotta say too, I like the casting in this film. I like where you went with kind of creating names that aren't necessarily familiar to at least American audiences. What was your thought pattern and kind of casting this and building this world with these characters?
I mean, some of it was about like the deconstruction of genre and talking back to science fiction and horror of the 50s, you know, the idea of the scientist and the usually these movies would be a scientist's girlfriend probably and a military character, and the scientist would be slugging people and running about and fixing stuff and sorting stuff out all over the place, and they'd be having these multi sets of skills and all this, and I think that what I tried to do with this is balance it back to where people can only do the things that they do. So the park ranger character, her skill set is being in the woods, so she's really good in the woods and she's under control and doesn't lose her head. The science character loses his head straight away, he's useless and outside of his environment falls to pieces straight away. And it's trying to, you know, I was thinking as you watch it, you make assumptions about who will take the lead and how heroic people will be, but then they're not, you know, and that I found was interesting. I mean, I am the Martin / Joel Fry character. I'm useless in any situation and particularly cowardly, you know. So, and I wanted to see that person up on screen, you know, and he just suffers and suffers and suffers, and he won't say anything, and he just gets, you know, and it gets worse and worse. And in a way, you know, the Alma character just like kind of puts up with it, but she basically, for me, becomes the only, you know, they go to see this creature and they present themselves in their different ways, you know, and the scientist and the religious person and the other scientist, but the creature doesn't want to go with any of those people because they're useless, you know, and it's the one person who goes with is the person who's kept it together throughout the whole thing. So that was the structure.
Now, the one thing I wanted to touch on a little further is that this isn't a gory movie in the traditional sense, but when there are injuries, they're unflinching. Without spoiling too much, there's a particular scene in a tent that's so well paced and tense. Was it important to you to build these moments out with practical effects to kind of get the reactions and kind of make this as real as possible, I suppose?
Yeah, totally. I mean, look, part of it is that if you do it right, you hold the attention of the audience for a very long time after the event, and it colours all the scenes after that. It's kind of like comedy is the same thing. If you make people laugh enough, then the laughter will run across scenes that aren't that funny, you know, and it will just keep them they'll go from high laughter to just cheeriness to happiness, and then you have to make them laugh again. And it's the same with violence, really. So you kind of can and unease, so you can you've got like a grace period of like 10-15 minutes after something really shocking that people's hearts are still going, and then they assume that everything is horrible, going to be terrible after that and shocking, whereas you don't have to work as hard, you know, you can just keep the thing moving along at that, you know. And I think that, you know, my intention with some of that tense stuff was to almost stop time, you know, to trap you and make you think as an audience member, I'm never getting out of this. This is never going to end, and I'm terrified forever, you know, and it will scar you. And that's the point, because there's movies that are much more violent than this and much more graphic, but it's about intent. And if you're not trying to scare people, you're not very scary, you know. And you end up in that kind of, you can cut as many limbs off as you like, but it won't scare people. It might amuse them, you know, and they might laugh, but it won't. You know, I think it's definitely something to do with that it's trust between the audience and the filmmaker, and if the audience trusts the filmmaker, then they can take them on a wild ride, but they know they're never going to fuck them up too much. But if you don't trust the filmmaker, you're in trouble, because you don't know what they're going to show you and what and how and for how long, and and that's when it starts to get really uncomfortable and really, really scary.
Well, I was going to say too, there's a level of just seeing people frustrated in a horror film is sometimes far more compelling, because you're going through the emotional pattern, a real, very, very connecting emotional reaction to these people. And I think that's what's happening here. You're understanding these people, and you're understanding that there's something going on. I love that. And I think that's something that a lot of great horror filmmakers do. And I think it's something we rarely see. It's because it's always shock value.
Yeah, I mean, if you watch The Exorcist, the terrifying thing in The Exorcist for me is that kid getting a load of tests, medical tests at the start. That is terrifying, and the noise of that thing going, da, 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 da. You're watching it, and that horror lasts for the rest of the movie, But a lot of this is about, I think, trying to find things which are relatable and understandable and to the human scale, rather than that are so outrageously big that they couldn't ever possibly happen to you. And as soon as it's at your scale, you start to you relate to it and feel it more than you do when things get more out of hand, I think.
Dude, it's such an honor. You're an incredible director. You're an incredible filmmaker, and we're so happy to have you on Sound Scary. So,
cheers, man.
Thank you. Yeah, happy man.
To be here.
Yeah, you have to come back. No. You are welcome anytime, my friend. Yes. Anytime.
Love to talk movies with you. Well, congratulations on this film. We super dug it, and we'll be sure to get the word out there.
Thank you.
Yes.
All right.
Cheers.
You have a good one. Thank you.
Bye, guys.
Make sure this Friday you check out his new film, In the Earth. It's a mind fuck, and it's a wild ride.
It's a trip.
Trust me. Yeah, it's a trip. Have some fun with this one and watch it twice.